My name is Travis, and I live in Knoxville, Tennessee. This story happened about 5 years ago, but it still haunts me, and I can't seem to forget it. I'm not sure if telling it here will help, but maybe someone else can understand what we went through. It was supposed to be a simple hunting trip with some friends, but it turned into a nightmare that none of us could ever explain. It all started on a Friday afternoon. I met with Rick and Paul, two old buddies of mine, and we decided to head up to Blackwater Forest. It's a place not many people like to go to, but we thought it would be just another weekend getaway. We had been hunting there a few times before, and honestly, we thought it was pretty safe. Nothing out of the ordinary. We set up camp as usual, just the three of us, no big deal. We joked, shared beers, and talked about old times. But as the night crept in, something felt off. It was like the air got heavier. The forest, which was always quiet at night, suddenly felt alive. The rustling of the leaves wasn't the same as it used to be. The wind felt different, like it was trying to tell us something. I know it sounds crazy, but that's how it felt. Around midnight, Rick suggested we check the radios just to make sure we could communicate in case of an emergency. We always carried two-way radios with us when we went hunting, and they were usually reliable. When Rick turned his on, there was static at first. But then, just as he was about to speak, a voice came through. It sounded like Danny, one of our friends who couldn't make the trip, but Danny was thousands of miles away, back in town. The voice on the radio was soft at first, almost like it was whispering. "Travis, I'm right behind you." We all froze. Rick looked at me and I could see the fear in his eyes. We thought it was a prank, some kind of glitch in the radio, but the voice sounded too real, too close. We checked the radio again thinking it was malfunctioning, but everything seemed fine. It wasn't just the voice that scared us. It was the fact that it spoke at exactly the moment I turned around. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up like something was watching me. I dismissed it as paranoia, but then the voice came again, this time clearer, almost mocking. "I'm right here, Travis. Why are you so scared?" I can't explain it, but the way it said my name, it didn't feel right. We tried to contact Danny, but the radio just continued to crackle. We couldn't get a signal from him or anyone else. Then we heard it again, a voice, not from our radios, but from the woods, barely audible, like a whisper in the wind. "Run, Travis. Run." I don't know how long we stood there in silence, trying to make sense of what was happening, but something inside me knew we weren't alone anymore. We packed up quickly, trying to leave, but as we walked, the voice followed us. It seemed to be everywhere, coming from the trees, the rocks, the ground. It echoed in our heads, mimicking our voices, calling our names, telling us to stop. I can't remember exactly what happened next. All I know is that we got separated. I woke up alone the next morning. I couldn't find Rick or Paul anywhere. The forest seemed too quiet, the usual sounds were gone. I tried calling out to them, but the only response was the wind. I searched for hours, walking deeper into the woods, but it was like they vanished. I thought I was losing my mind. That's when I found the first of the radios, lying abandoned on the forest floor. I turned it on, and for a second it was just static. But then a voice came through, barely audible at first. "You shouldn't have come, Travis." I knew it wasn't Rick or Paul. It was something else, something that was using their voices. I won't go into all the details of what happened after that. All I know is that the voice kept following me. It would whisper my name at random moments, always just out of reach. I ran. I ran as fast as I could, but the voice would always find me. It was in my head, in my ears, taunting me. When I finally made it back to the campsite, I thought I was safe. But it wasn't over. I checked the radio, and there on the other side was the voice again. "I'm coming, Travis. Don't hide. I know where you are." The worst part of it all? I never saw what was following me. I never saw anything but shadows, movement just out of the corner of my eye. And I heard things. Things that shouldn't be possible. The radio crackling with voices that weren't there. The sound of footsteps behind me, always just close enough to make me feel like I was being hunted. But I never saw it. Not once. We finally made it out of Blackwater Forest that afternoon, Rick and Paul both showing up hours later, disoriented but alive. They didn't say much. Neither of them wanted to talk about it. But there was something in their eyes. Something I knew wasn't right. And as much as I tried to forget it, that trip still haunted me. A few months later, the police found the footage. It wasn't much, but what they did find was enough to convince me that we weren't crazy. There was a recording from one of our radios captured on film. You could hear the voice. You could hear it laughing as it imitated Danny's voice, taunting us. You could hear our own voices, trying to communicate, but being drowned out by something else. Something dark. The worst part? We never found out what happened to Danny, or Rick, or Paul. They all disappeared after that. The last I heard, Paul had moved away. Rick kept quiet. And I haven't been able to shake the feeling that something is still out there in the woods, waiting for me. Every once in a while, when I'm alone, I hear it again. That voice, always whispering, always waiting. But I don't go back. I don't think I ever will. My name is James Miller, and I'm 42 years old. I'm from Anchorage, Alaska, and I'm going to tell a story that happened to my group during a hunting expedition in the winter of 2013. That day, what should have been a routine journey turned into a nightmare that still makes me question what we really saw. There were 5 of us. Jim, who was the group leader, Rick, Tom, and Mike. The weather was calm, typical for Alaskan winters, with snow covering everything around us. We had left early, before dawn, to hunt in the northern region, where wildlife is usually abundant. We'd hiked in that area before, so everyone was comfortable with the terrain. It was supposed to be a routine expedition, but things changed when we found the footprints. It was around noon when Tom was the first to spot something strange. He wandered off a little from the group while exploring the surroundings, but quickly returned, looking scared, saying he had found something in the snow. When we went over there, we saw the tracks. They were human footprints, barefoot, as if someone had walked there without protection against the freezing snow. But what unsettled us even more was the fact that the footprints ended abruptly, with no explanation. The snow around them was pristine, without any sign of struggle or anything that could explain it. We stood there, trying to make sense of it. Maybe someone got lost, Mike suggested, even though we all knew that no one could just disappear like that in broad daylight in the middle of an Alaskan forest. There were no signs of a fight or anything violent. We stood there, looking at each other, and the calm atmosphere that had surrounded us suddenly felt heavy. Even with the biting cold, it seemed like the temperature had dropped even further. When we decided to set up camp that night, something felt wrong. We couldn't pinpoint what it was, but there was a strange feeling in the air. Jim tried to keep everyone calm, saying it was just our minds playing tricks on us. The fire was burning, the food was good, but something still felt out of place. Tom was restless, and Rick kept looking at the forest with a tense look, as if waiting for something to emerge from the dark. Then it happened. I was sitting near the fire, trying to ignore the feeling that something was watching us, when I heard a snap coming from the trees. I glanced quickly, but didn't see anything. Jim was on the other side, talking about a plan to hunt in the morning, but something wouldn't let me focus. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Suddenly, Mike yelled, "Look over there!" We all turned, and at the top of one of the nearest trees there was a figure standing. It was a silhouette, featureless, a dark shape that seemed to be watching our camp. What froze me was that, when I looked at it, I couldn't make out any details. There was no face, no human characteristics. It was a pure shape, a dark outline that stood out against the dark night sky. At first, we thought it might be a shadow cast by the tree or some trick of the light, but the feeling of presence was too strong to ignore. The figure stayed there, motionless, watching us. It wasn't like an animal or anything that could be easily explained. It was just standing there as if it was waiting, or worse, as if it knew we were there. I could feel the weight of its presence, and a chill ran down my spine. We tried to rationalize once again, but it only made things worse. Jim started calling out, thinking it could be a lost person, but the figure didn't respond or move. The silence that followed was filled with such tension that it almost felt suffocating. Rick was shaking, saying we should leave immediately, but Jim insisted we stay, saying maybe it was just our minds playing tricks on us, creating an invisible enemy. However, things only got worse. Throughout the night, something started moving around our camp. It wasn't animals, It wasn't the natural sounds of the forest. It was soft steps, almost imperceptible, but they were all around us. I could hear the snow crunching under something moving, but when we looked, there was nothing there. It was like something was trying to get closer, but without being seen. With each passing hour, the feeling of dread only grew. Then, when the figure disappeared from the trees, we started hearing low laughs. Not like a human laugh, but something distorted, almost like a whisper in the frozen breeze. That's what made me lose it. I ran to the others and told them we needed to leave, but Jim was convinced there was nothing to fear. He thought our minds were playing tricks, that we were seeing things, but that didn't explain what we were hearing. The next morning, the footprints we had found earlier were there again, but now they were closer to the camp, as if the figure had followed us through the night. There was no explanation for this, and when we started looking for more clues, more footprints suddenly disappeared. It was as if someone was toying with us, leading us to a point of no return. I never found any logical explanation for what happened that night. What scares me the most, even today, is not the footprints or the faceless silhouette, but the fact that it just stopped. Like it was a warning and then it ceased for some unknown reason. After that, nothing else happened. We returned to Anchorage, and the authorities found nothing. No clues, no explanation, and the feeling of being watched was never felt again. I try not to think about it, but whenever I'm in the forest at night, or even in an isolated area, the memory of that faceless silhouette still haunts me. What was that? Who or what was out there watching us? I still have no idea, but I know I'll never go back to that place. And if anyone asks me, I just say, no, don't go. My name is Vienne. I'm 38 years old and I live in Oregon. I'm a hunter, and during my years living in the wilderness, I've learned to deal with the silence of nature, the sounds of the forest, and, of course, with loneliness. But the story I'm about to tell happened on one of those days when loneliness turned into something much more sinister, something that still haunts me to this day. I was on an expedition, something simple, to grab some traps and maybe hunt a deer for dinner. The trail I was following wasn't well marked, but I was used to this kind of journey. Hours had passed since I was away from the main road, but the forest was quiet, and the sky began to turn an orange hue as the sun set. That's when I saw it. A cabin. It was in the middle of a clearing, hidden between a few trees, almost as if it was waiting for me. It wasn't a new cabin, far from it. It seemed abandoned, old, with a roof nearly collapsing and the wood covered in moss. Something told me not to enter, but curiosity and loneliness pushed me inside. The door was slightly ajar, and I pushed it open slowly. The smell inside was musty, old wood, and something else. Something indescribable. What caught my attention, however, wasn't the smell or the dust covering everything, but the marks on the walls. There were words hastily scribbled, as if someone had written in panic. "Do not respond to them," was scrawled multiple times around the cabin in a chaotic manner. The paint was fresh, still slightly glimmering under the fading light of the day. I didn't know what to think, but the warning was clear. I wasn't supposed to be there. I hesitated for a moment, but the solitude spoke louder. I decided to spend the night in the cabin, waiting for the sun to completely set. Darkness was settling in, and as usual, I made myself comfortable by the cold fireplace. I didn't know what was ahead, but I felt safer there than in the forest. Then, as the night progressed, something strange began to happen. At first, it was just whispers. I thought it was the wind, but then I started hearing words, like someone was calling out to me in a muffled voice, almost imperceptible. I went to the window and looked out into the dark, but I saw nothing. The sound seemed to come from all directions, a distant murmur, but unmistakable. "Help us." The voices weren't clear, but I heard them with a disturbing clarity. My instinct told me to ignore it, to lock the doors and wait until morning. But something in those voices, something in them felt real, urgent. I couldn't just stay there and do nothing. I couldn't ignore it. So, with an increasing sense of discomfort, I shouted back, "Who's there?" And then something even stranger happened. The voices started responding, but not with new words, not with more pleas for help, but by repeating my own words, each time more distinct. "Who's there? Who's there?" I couldn't understand it. Those voices were imitating me perfectly, as if they were trying to speak for me, use my own voice. My heart began to race. I tried to rationalize it, forcing myself to believe it was some kind of trick, maybe someone hiding in the forest or a strange echo from nature. But it wasn't. Every time I spoke, the voices repeated my words closer, clearer, as if they were getting nearer to me. The last time I spoke, they almost whispered in my ear, "Help us! Help us!" I stood up from my chair, dizzy with fear, looking around the cabin. The feeling of being watched intensified. The air grew colder, and the only light was from the oil lamp I had lit. My vision was becoming blurry, and fear took over. I could feel those voices weren't human, but I didn't know what they were. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen in fear. The voices didn't stop, always repeating my words, always closer, always clearer. I felt a pressure, as though I was being pushed out of the cabin, forced to follow the sound, to see what was hidden in that darkness. With each repetition, something inside me became more disconnected from reality. I couldn't tell anymore if they were external voices or if they were part of my own mind. Finally, I couldn't take it any longer. I went to the door, and with my heart pounding, I stepped out into the dark forest. The voices continued, echoing in my mind. I ran, not looking back, not thinking about anything other than escaping that place. I knew that if I looked back, I would see something I couldn't comprehend. My body was in survival mode, and I didn't care about logic or reason anymore. I had to leave, no matter the cost. When I reached the main road, the sound of the voices disappeared, as if they had never existed. I stopped, breathless, listening to the silence around me. The fear still gripped my chest, but there were no more voices, nothing. I stood there in the dark, trying to regain control of myself, trying to process what had happened. I don't know what happened in that cabin. I don't know what those voices were or who or what was calling out to me. But what I do know is that when I looked back for the last time, I saw something in the line of the forest. It wasn't a person. It was something much stranger, a tall figure, its silhouette blurred and undefined, almost as if it was distorted by the darkness. I don't know if it was real or if my mind was just trying to find an explanation for the terror I had experienced. All I know is that since that day, I never went back to that forest, never went back to that cabin, and I've never told anyone. I don't know if I'm still being followed by those voices, or if it was just my mind playing tricks on me. What I do know is that the fear I felt that night has never left me. And even now, to this day, I wonder, what really happened that day? What was that? I don't have answers, and maybe I never will. But one thing is certain. That experience left an indelible mark on me, and the fear I felt, that fear, that has never gone away. My name is Tyler Stevens. I am 34 years old, and I am from a small town in West Virginia. About 5 years ago, a group of friends and I went hunting in the Elk River area, a region known for its legends and mysteries. At the time, I had no idea how much that day would change my life. I'll try to summarize what happened that day, but to this day I still don't know if what I saw was real or if the human mind can truly go mad like that. What happened in that forest? Well, there's no way to explain it properly. It was a Saturday in autumn, and the morning was cold but perfect for hunting. It was me, Mark, Greg, John, and Eli. We were used to hunting in the remote areas of West Virginia, and we always loved the peace nature brought us. But that day, something was different. We had heard stories of hunters disappearing around there, but nothing serious enough to make us turn back. When we moved a little off the main trail and began walking deeper into the woods, Mark, who was leading, found something strange. He was trying to cross an area dense with shrubs when something stood out in the middle of the vegetation. It was a hole, an opening in the ground that seemed to have been covered, but something had destroyed it. We got closer and saw it was a tunnel. It didn't seem natural. The entrance was narrow, as if it had been hidden there for centuries. I got a chill down my spine, but Greg and Eli were excited, and even Mark seemed more curious than scared. So we decided to go in. The tunnel spiraled downward, with the smell of damp earth and the sound of water dripping onto the rocks. The walls were dirty, with strange marks as if something had scratched there. Greg was the first to notice the claws. At first, I thought it was just natural wear on the stones, but when I looked more closely, I saw that the marks were deep, as if something had really left them. The unease started to grow, but we ignored it. We moved forward. We had no idea where this tunnel would lead us, but we didn't expect it to take us to something much darker than we could understand. The tunnel seemed endless. As we went deeper, we began to hear strange sounds, like scratching on the floor, as if something was moving in there, watching us. We stood in silence, trying to figure out what was going on. When Mark suddenly stopped, I nearly ran into him. It was another Mark, but this one was different. It wasn't just a claw scratching the stone. It was as if something had left a warning, a drawing maybe, some sort of symbol or arrangement of lines. It seemed like the tunnel was trying to tell us something. It forced us to stop and reflect for a moment. After a while, Eli, who was always cracking jokes to lighten the mood, suggested we turn back, since no one was feeling good about the situation. But when we tried to go back, we couldn't. It was as if the tunnel had changed. The walls didn't look the same anymore, and the air had gotten heavier, as if something was breathing there. The footprints we left on the ground, the marks we had made with our boots, had simply vanished, as if someone had erased all evidence that we had been there. And then we heard a sound. Something coming from the depths of the tunnel. It was no longer scratching. It was something heavier, closer. Something that shouldn't be there. We all turned at the same time, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. That's when a shadow passed in front of us, cutting through the little light that was left. It wasn't a human shadow, but something else, something that didn't resemble anything we had ever seen. The temperature dropped drastically, and the feeling that we were being watched became suffocating. We tried to run, but the tunnel seemed to stretch, as if it was taking us deeper with every step. The sound got closer. There was no more laughing, only heavy breathing and dragging feet. The worst part was that at one point it felt like we were moving away from the entrance, as if the exit was moving further away from us. The tunnel never seemed to end. We didn't know where we were anymore, but we were certain something was there, waiting for us. Each of us felt it in their bones. I looked behind me, and that's when I saw it. Something was following us, moving fast, as if it was dragging itself along the walls, listening to our steps, waiting for the right moment. I couldn't see what it was, but I knew it was there. It wasn't an illusion. It wasn't just exhaustion. It was real. Something was truly there. Something with claws, with eyes that could see in the dark. Something that knew exactly who we were, what we wanted, and had been watching us since the moment we entered. Panic started to take over. None of us could think straight anymore. We tried to run, but it felt pointless. No matter how much we ran, it didn't seem like we were going anywhere. And then, suddenly, everything went quiet. The sound stopped, and the shadow disappeared. We were left there, not knowing what to do. We couldn't trust our eyes anymore, but something still told us we were being watched. When we finally made it out of the tunnel, it was already night. None of us wanted to talk about what had happened. We didn't know if it was real or if we were going crazy. But something changed in me that day. Something was burned into my memory, something that still haunts me. The tunnel is still there, somewhere in the Elk River woods, and I know that if I ever go back, it won't be to hunt. It will be to understand what was really waiting for us down there in the dark. In the following days, I tried to go back to normal life. I went back to work, saw my family, and tried to focus on everyday things. But every time I closed my eyes, I remembered the sound coming from the tunnel, the feeling that something was watching me, the fixed stare of something I couldn't understand, but I knew it was there in the dark. I tried to forget. I tried to convince myself it was just in our heads, that fear had made us create things that weren't there. But the truth is, to this day, I don't know what really happened in that tunnel. I don't know what followed us. I don't know what that sound was or the shadow we saw. And worse, I don't know if it's still there, waiting. Maybe one day, if I'm brave enough, I'll go back and try to figure it all out again. But for now, I live with the memory of that day, with the fear that we're still being watched, in the dark. In the days that followed, I tried to continue with my life as usual. I went back to work, saw my family, and tried to focus on normal, everyday things. But every time I closed my eyes, I remembered the sound from the tunnel, the feeling of being watched, the fixed gaze of something that I didn't understand, but I knew it was there, in the dark. Eli started having nightmares. He talked about a shadow that followed him around the house, and he was sure it was the same thing we had been chasing in the tunnel. John seemed scared of any noise that couldn't be explained, and Greg just disappeared. He didn't talk to anyone after that day, and no one could find him. I don't know what happened to him, but part of me still believes that he was taken by it, whatever it was. I tried to forget. I tried to convince myself it was just in our heads, that fear had made us create things that weren't there. But the truth is, to this day, I don't know what really happened in that tunnel. I don't know what followed us. I don't know what that sound was or the shadow we saw, and worse, I don't know if it's still there waiting. Maybe one day, if I'm brave enough, I'll go back and try to figure it all out again. But for now, I live with the memory of that day, with the fear that we're still being watched in the dark.